I have experienced social mobility myself. So grew up in a council house for the first 11 years of my life. Would never have imagined to like have a corporate job, work in Canary Wharf. Having achieved the things that I have been able to at the age that I was able to, I don't think that like statistically, like I don't feel like that's normal. And I don't think that's fair. Like it shouldn't be because you're born in this environment that you can't do certain things. So that's also my own lived experiences of that social mobility really, really inspires me to help other people on that journey.
Hello guys, welcome back to another episode of Eastern Honeys. We are so glad to have you in the room with us. And today we have a very special, accomplished, radiant guest, Maya Welford. Welcome, Maya.
Hi, thank you.
Maya.
Thanks for having me.
So let's kick off, as we always do, with the professional bio.
So meet Maya Welford, everybody, the Japanese-British host of the podcast That's My Name, where she explores the rich stories, culture, and traditions behind names from around the world. Maya's storytelling and advocacy shine through not just in her podcast, but also her professional career. Maya holds a degree in psychology and works as a change leader at Barclays. Maya speaks publicly on diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as AI's impact on gender and ethnicity pay gaps work. She received the Desmond Tutu Award for her community service in mentoring students at her alma mater, King's College. In 2019, she launched the charity mentoring program through Barclays Gender Network, WIN. Focuses on creating meaningful connections and driving positive change. Maya is a visionary, an advocate, and a voice for the underrepresented. Maya Welford, welcome to Eastern Honeys.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. It's going to be good.
Yay! So in your own words, can you introduce yourself and describe your background, your upbringing, and what you do?
So my full name is Maya September Welford, and I share that because it gives a bit more insight into who I am and my identity. So Maya is the first name. It's like, it can be a Japanese name, but it's also an international name. Mitsuko is my Japanese grandma's name. So I'm half Japanese, and my parents wanted to kind of give me part of that into my name. And September's the month that I was born in, and then Welford is just my dad's surname that I've carried on. So yeah, that's my name. In terms of who I am, I work within the sustainability field, but I've only started doing that since February, so it's all quite new.
Congrats.
Thank you. But my background's in psychology, so very, very interested in like human behaviour and why people behave in the way that they do, what motivates their decisions, and how they kind of think, feel, and act in the world and in society. So that's always been a really strong interest of mine, as well as like the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. As you mentioned in the kind of intro, I have done a lot kind of in that space, both at work and externally too.
It must be hard unpacking psychology as you move deeper into your career, like from an intersectional perspective, because in your experience, how much does our culture affect our psychology?
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely does. And I think also, like, the more I go into my career, like, everyone would just act in, like, a very rational way. But actually, like, I realised that, like, even as adults, like, sometimes it's like school, like being at school again, which was just so bizarre, because you think, like, you're at school and you have all the drama and then that will stop. But actually, like, it does continue, like, throughout adult life. So that was, like, a really interesting reflection on like becoming an adult and growing into adulthood.
We have no idea what we're doing. We just
bumbling along with it. Yeah.
Unfurling as we go on our journey. Unfurling.
Yeah. So in terms of, I'm just going to like jump into what you said about your name, which is beautiful, by the way.
It's so beautiful.
Thank you. Did your mum, who's Japanese, take on your dad's name?
Yes, she did. So they got married a month before my sister was born. And she took on my dad's surname. And I think that is quite typical, like obviously in English culture, it's like the norm. But I think also in Japanese culture, I think it's the tradition for the woman to take the husband's surname. So I feel like for her, it wasn't, I don't know, I actually haven't had a conversation with her, but I think it's not something that she made an intentional decision about. It was like, that's just the done thing, rather than challenging that and being like, I want to keep my surname or I want to double barrel it. I think it was just something that was felt natural and normal. Yeah. Whereas I feel like now people are having more intentional decisions around like your name, your surname.
Yeah, because a lot of, I mean, we're at an age where like all of our friends are getting married, engaged, having children, and the name conversation is coming into play, / has come into play. Recently I was at a friend's house and all of them, this is my like group of white English friends, and all of them were like, yeah, taking my husband's name, and didn't think twice. They're like, my mum did it, so we're like, can't wait to have his name, can't wait to just... And I was horrified. I was genuinely like aghast, because for me, even my mum double-barreled my dad's name, and I've always had the trauma thinking of like, am I going to triple barrel with my husband? Yeah. But it's never been a thought that I'm just going to take his name and erase mine. The sense of legacy, heritage, like ancestry. Yeah. So yeah, I'm interested in your personal take on that, on like double barreling or taking names. And also if, based on your podcast, That's My Name, do you think people of colour hold more weight in their surname?
Yeah, it's interesting. So my personal view about taking surnames or not is, number one, like it's a personal decision. Yeah. So like what I say, you know, no one else has to follow what I say, that's fine. But for me personally, like, well, I don't think I want to get married. I don't necessarily believe in marriage as like a construct or a concept anymore. And actually that's kind of come about having reflected more on marriage during my podcast. So that's been an interesting like transition, because definitely growing up I was always like, oh, I'm gonna have like a fairy tale wedding and all of this stuff, and then it's now like I'm an adult that I'm like, actually that's not for me. So I wouldn't take my husband's surname if I did get married. If I did get married, I would double barrel. And in terms of like children, we would double barrel. But what's difficult is not difficult, but what's been a topic of conversation actually recently is me and my partner both have like very white sounding surnames, but our child is going to be very mixed. So our child is only going to be a quarter English, but has this like will have like a really, really white
passing name.
Yeah, surname. And we're just like, that surname kind of gives us the ick, like, we're not really vibing with the surname, like, I'm sorry, child, like, we're not vibing with it. So, like, should we make one up? Like, what should we do? We haven't really, like, decided. I think the obvious thing for us would be double barrel it, but we don't 100% love our surnames together, because we don't think it signifies the beautiful mix that this child is. But maybe we can like play with like the other names that we're going to give our child and like make sure that it feels representative.
Speaking of representation, so shortened, you have a Western / white passing name, Maya Welford. Do you think that name has aided you in life, in career, as opposed to people of colour that have non-white passing names?
At face value, like, your name is just your name, and like there are instances in life where some people are forced to like reflect more on their name because perhaps it's like constantly mispronounced, or it may be a source of like not getting certain opportunities. But I think, yeah, definitely if I think about my own name, and just like Maya Welford, it is just not, it doesn't feel like it's complicated or easy to get wrong, although it is like persistently mispronounced, which it baffles me every time it's mispronounced. So yeah, I think like there are definitely, like, knowing that people experience barriers because of their names. For example, if they don't have like an anglicized or an English sounding name or a white passing name, people definitely experience barriers. Like, there's so much research that says, like, if you have a non-English sounding name on your CV, you're less likely to get through to interview stage. And that's just like, not just one study, like repeatedly studies, if your CV is identical. Right, there's been like systematic research which has looked into that. That's awful, right? Like, how is it that your name alone can lead to like you getting an interview, getting your foot through the door or not? And reflecting on my own name, I don't think that my name is one that they would an interviewer would look at and be like, oh, we're going to bias against this person because of their name. Whereas I know a lot of people who would be biased against because of their name.
Unconscious bias definitely plays a part in it. Yeah. Definitely. Actually, I myself have I want to say Spanish sounding name, so Isabelle and Dicho. And a part of my personal journey with reclaiming my Filipino-ness and heritage has led me to a point where I'm like, shall I change my name? Like, shall I have an indigenous sounding name in order to have that Pinoy pride? But also it comes at odds with that, you know, the topic of like legacy, because obviously our parents have chosen this name for us. In Philippines too, like indigenous names were kind of unpopular growing up. Most famously, Matia Buena, you know, she has like a Filipino name. And I think it's really amazing that now we'll come full circle and we're here. You know, we have Pinoy pride and there's a real beauty in choosing your own name and reclaiming your identity.
Way before professional, like way before CV writing, in high school specifically, I remember starting to feel a lot of shame and a desire to like water down my name. My full name's Melissa Legarda Alcantara. The latter two are double-barreled. It's like impossible to fit on a form sometimes. I was one of two Melissas in school, and at school, people, including teachers, would just be like, Melissa with a long surname, or the second Melissa. I would like always what do you call it? Abbreviate my name to just Melissa LA, make it easy and digestible and I don't know, just like pack it neatly in a box for people to get it. Professionally, I've dropped the last bit, Alcantara, because Kim Kardashian's personal trainer is called Melissa Alcantara. She has the internet. So I'm like, okay, Melissa Legarda. It's really complex because now I'm like, should I be putting my full double barrel? And I'm always like, God, that's really long character-wise. But it's also like, why should I continue to make it neat?
For other people.
For other people's consumption. So there's actually so much in a name, and I feel like I've not properly even like deeped the levels of like shame and trauma and complexity that come with that. And then also as a person of color, it's extra thinking around it, especially as someone engaged in like culture and identity as we are. What's in a name?
Coming from like two different cultures, what would you say is your like favorite thing about being from two places?
I think it's probably like the ability to relate to and understand difference. Yeah, and like realize that not everyone's the same. And that's beautiful. That's like such a beautiful thing. If we think about London and we think about the rest of the UK, I think London has so much diversity and multiculturalism. I feel very grateful and privileged that I grew up in London because I was exposed to like such diversity. And sometimes when I think about people who grew up in like a village who have never like engaged with anyone who's even slightly remotely different, and then I think that I just feel sad for them. Like that just, and then that breeds like what we've been seeing around the country over this summer with like, there's such like fear and hostility towards people who are different.
It's very layered and nuanced and complex. I laughed when you were saying that because you're like coming from London, and when we first met, you're like, Beau E3. It was so.
Why did I say that?
I don't know. I like think about it sometimes.
33.
Which is actually why I wore this T-shirt. Because we are all from London, and there's such a distinct difference about being from the UK and being a Londoner.
Yes. Yeah.
And I feel such a connection with anybody and from London.
Yeah.
Like, what can you speak about that? Like being a Londoner. Like, I think we'll all share our favourite things about being a Londoner.
So my favourite thing about being a Londoner, the exposure to like so many different things and people and views and beliefs and ways of living. It's not perfect. Like, I think definitely we have issues like in London and in the UK. We absolutely do. I think when I'm around my friends and we all have this like understanding and this embracing of each other, regardless of like views and beliefs and walks of life, I think that's probably my favourite thing about London is the diversity. Yeah. How about you?
I would say the exposure from a very, very early age in multiculturalism being the norm. Like, I would leave my flat, I would walk to the bus stop, go to school. On that short 10-minute walk, I would smell shisha smoke, jerk smoke, like Chinese restaurants down Queensway, people going to the mosque, like Filipinos coming back from church, like Catholics, like it's just all part and parcel of being a Londoner. And especially when you're in pockets that are so mixed up. Like, for me, West London was like, it was such a blend of different cultures. Whereas, even, and then when you have the freedom to go to other boroughs like Brixton, more Caribbean, or Earls Court, more Asian, whatever it is, like, you know, it's like experiencing the world through different communities. And I too feel really sad when people don't get that exposure. For example, my partner was saying earlier, he's British Japanese. He grew up in a small village in Surrey, and most of his friends were white English. His only real touch point with his culture was through his mum and family friends. When I share my childhood experiences, he's baffled. It's not necessarily just multiculturalism. It's like class differences, exposure to conversations, to different, like you're saying, the empathy of seeing the struggle, like someone with a single mum who's a domestic helper, all these different things, that's a struggle I can empathize with because I've seen it through a friend. I've seen, like, you know, you can see struggle, you can see joy, celebration, and you start to form the vocabulary of connecting with different people. Whereas, you have compassion and you see people as human. Whereas if you don't grow up in that environment, it's very easy to dehumanize. So like, you know, headlines, migrant boats. It's like, hello, these are human beings, but it's language that is so important, and lived experience of being a Londoner helps you just naturally like see past those things. How about you?
I would say my favourite part about being a Londoner is the grit and like the banter. It's really not, I mean, sometimes it's not that deep. You just kind of like get on with it and you find the joy and the humour in things. Maybe that's not so much a London thing, but a British thing. And I love the fact that a lot of the times people move here from somewhere else. And like, as your answers say, like, the multiculturalism of it. One time I was on the bus to work. It was like the 141 to like Old Street or something. And I was listening to Tracy Chapman, Fast Car, in my headphones. And then I saw this black woman and her little girl like holding hands, like I was on the top deck, they were like walking to school. Like I constantly am like tearing up on this pod. But like, especially with like Tracy Chapman in my ears, I was like, I am on the verge. I'm on the verge, on the way to my corporate job. And it made, like, seeing their journey to school, because she's obviously moved here for a better life for her daughter, And I was like, that's me, that's us, that's me and my friends. Like, they moved here for a better life for each other. And it was just really beautiful to see that illustrated in such a simple way. All from the top deck of the 141. For those that don't know about social mobility, please can you define what that means?
Yeah, it's a very fair question, because I think like on the tin, like if there was a tin that said social mobility, like you wouldn't really know what's inside that tin. Even like there was an example where someone thought it was to do with like developing social skills and stuff. So I think it's still very much not necessarily known or understood as a term broadly. For me, and how I would define social mobility is the movement of things like your income, like your household income. I think, yeah, it's very, very closely tied with income. So you can have like upward social mobility. So that's where you move up, for example, potentially like social classes. But there's also the downward social mobility, which we kind of spoke about. The way that I think about it is I know that I've experienced social mobility because I am in like a better financial state and situation compared to how I was growing up, but also compared to my parents at my age. So if I really compare like my parents in their 20s, it was, from what I understand from them, a complete struggle, like no money at all to raise me and my sister. And I know that I've experienced social mobility because I'm in a very different and privileged position when I compare myself to where they were. So I think it's, yeah, for me, I use that comparison against like parents and also your like how you grew up and in the environments that you grew up in.
You work a lot within social mobility,
Yeah.
intersectionality, diversity and inclusion, a lot of the same spaces that I work in. Why is that so important to you?
Because I have a very strong belief that the circumstances of your birth, or like the family you're born into, or the situation that you're born into, I don't think that it should fully determine your outcomes in life. Whereas we live in a world and in a society that it does. So, you know, if you're born into a lower socioeconomic background or low-income family, you statistically are less likely to have certain outcomes, like maybe you're less likely to achieve certain grades or go to university and so on. And I just don't think that's fair. Like, it's not fair that like, because you're born into this circumstance, that like literally when you're born, like these are like the typical paths that like you go down, and like some of these paths over here, which might be more accessible to another child who's born into a really wealthy family, they have all these like range of paths that like opened up for them by the virtue of like being born into that family. And I just don't think that's fair. So that's like one perspective. Second is I have experienced social mobility myself. So I grew up in a council house for the first 11 years of my life. Would never have imagined to like have a corporate job, work in Canary Wharf. Having achieved the things that I have been able to at the age that I was able to, I don't think that, like, statistically, like, I don't feel like that's normal. And I don't think that's fair. Like, it shouldn't be because you're born in this environment that you can't do certain things. So that's also my own lived experiences of that social mobility really, really inspires me to help other people on that journey.
In terms of social mobility, how does your work in social mobility affect your perspective on class in the UK as it pertains to culture and race? Because I think, for example, people of colour who didn't grow up skiing and tasting wine with their family at 16 and going to vineyards and all of this stuff, they can have excellent grades with the right D&I support and go to Oxford or Cambridge and suddenly be exposed to these whole new worlds and know which cheese goes with which wine and suddenly pick up a love for Mozart and, you know, whatever. But like, does having cultural capital like that mean anything in terms of actual class difference?
Typically in the corporate world, especially when we look up to like senior people who are perhaps in that older generation, I don't see many who are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So therefore, that kind of cultural capital and experience that they were like, it's just normal to them, having grown up in that kind of class, then makes them more likely to gravitate towards younger people who have also had those experiences growing up. And it's bullshit, right? That like, oh, just because I went skiing every winter or whenever you go skiing, I don't know, I've never been either. Just because I went skiing every winter since the age of 2, and I can banter with you about that in my interview with you, you're going to like me more, so you're going to be more likely to hire me. And then going back to the psychology point, humans naturally gravitate towards people who are similar to them. Even on like a topic of like skiing, if we're talking about that, somehow that comes up through an interview. Oh, actually, like, you're kind of like me, and I like this person, and they feel familiar, and they feel like someone I would trust to do this job. I'm going to hire that person, compared to maybe someone who is of a different like class background, different colour skin, different accent, all these different variables. This person doesn't feel that familiar. It comes back to that like unconscious, subconscious thing where you might not think that, or you might not want to view these two people differently, but actually because of your like internal biases that perhaps you might not be aware of or know how to challenge, you're still going to continue to lean more towards the people of certain backgrounds which are similar to you. So I think there's just so much work to be done in this space. Stuff like going skiing is not important. I don't think it has an impact on like how well someone can do their job. Also, I would argue that there's so much of like coming from a lower socioeconomic background that teaches you like resilience and how to be resourceful, how to get shit done with like no money.
Problem solving.
Exactly. Like you get so much, and like you can't teach that stuff at university. So I think it's really crucial that employers start to recognise or continue, like some are doing great work, others less so. I think it's so crucial that we like expand our view on like how can we assess people coming into the organisation. They don't all have to be university educated to come through. Like, what other skills have they developed?
Transferable skills.
One of our friends, Venus Wong, came on the pod. She's a Chinese journalist from Macau who's worked in British media, travel media for a long time. And she was talking about her experiences feeling so alienated, going like travel in the UK is a really white space anyway.
Yeah, totally.
But going into an established newspaper, being in a meeting room in the morning and they're all talking about cricket and football. She was like, just by virtue of having zero engagement with that, she felt so othered and like you left out of the conversation to the point where she just can't like chat about it. So I guess maybe earlier on in your career, do you have any instances where you've experienced stuff like this?
Definitely the skiing one, right? So like speaking about going skiing, like I never even thought about skiing before I started working. And now like at work, we go, oh yeah, I'm going skiing.
Oh damn.
With my kids.
It's like $1,000 a week per person.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it is the skiing one, which is like, and I've laughed about it with people who get it, like who just understand, like, I think that's a key example. Like, speaking about those kinds of like family holidays or holidays that they're going on.
I do remember I had a very wealthy friend and she took me to her dad's house, holiday home in Spain. I think we were 19 or 20 and I was only just really, as a Londoner, I went to London uni, all of these things. I was only just starting to have exposure to other worlds. And I remember he was like gesturing with his whiskey. He was like, so tell me, where do you and your family like to go skiing? And I was like, oh, I've never been skiing. And he was literally like, you poor creature. Poor creature.
Ew.
Yeah, now thinking back to that, at the time I was like, LOL, like I'm a tropical island baby. Of course I've never been skiing. Like I'd freeze to death on the mound. I know it was probably just like off the cuff, but also like creature. It's layered. But yeah, skiing is such a huge one.
To add about what you said earlier about race and class being intertwined, because I do believe the two things are intersected. The first time I haven't experienced racism in the workplace is when I was working at a pub to supplement being a freelance creative. So I was working during the day, like on shoots, and in the evening I'd go cycle to the pub. My manager was half British, half Chinese. I think him as well, like growing up in just outside of London in a predominantly white area, being half Chinese, I think he fostered a really good like crew because he hired like really multicultural people. I did think to myself, am I going to experience, racism or comments or things like that? Never, not once. Coming from a creative space, you think that people are very open-minded, accepting, a bit more educated, perhaps, on race, class, just have, like more sense of decorum, perhaps. I just had a really positive experience being in that space. And going back to that sense of othering, I believe that was so much more similar than we, originally think.
Also, it goes back to what Maya was saying. When people of colour are in positions of hiring power, you're going to hire much more representative employees and staff, which creates a better culture and space overall.
Definitely.
Just because we briefly mentioned AI at the start, huge conversation.
Huge.
But what work are you doing in that? And how do you think, or how are you imagining that AI is going to affect the race, climate, class conversation?
Yeah, so less work currently in AI, but my dissertation for my master's explored the disproportionate impacts of artificial intelligence on the ethnicity and gender pay gaps. The reality is that artificial intelligence exacerbates bias that we see in society because it learns from data. The data that it learns from typically is entrenched with bias because humans are biased. So just to provide like quite an easy to understand example, I think it was Amazon developed an algorithm to help them with sifting through CVs. This algorithm, it didn't have like gender information on these CVs, but actually this algorithm disproportionately was biased against women applicants versus applicants who it decided were men. This algorithm learned that okay, if I get a CV and there's like maybe certain activities that are more associated with a man, this person's the right person for the job. And they decided they had to scrap that algorithm because it was biased. So AI just really amplifies and magnifies the bias that we... Exactly. So it's not that like AI is bad, like AI is so helpful, it can like make things so efficient. What is really bad is like it holds up a mirror to us as humans and in society, and it says, this is all the bias that we have and that's embedded in systems and institutions, and AI is reproducing that, but at a massive scale. So there's so much work that needs to be done from like a societal and human level, but then also working with AI, maybe using AI to try and debias some of that data and decision making as well. So yeah, it's very complex, but like AI fundamentally, I don't think is negative. I think it's like when we feed in this like human related data, I suppose.
Yeah, because there was that conversation around ChatGPT early on that the majority of content it's trained on, the majority of people interacting it are typically like white men of a certain demographic. And when it learns off that much data, it begins to mirror those thoughts. And I feel like there's been a lot of like positive stuff around AI amplifying racial biases, especially with like Black women in pregnancy or sickle cell anemia. I know there's been work around that. Also, there's the part where AI does, for example, like Midjourney, when you render images, when you say, create me a picture of women from around the world, it has like the Disney bias where everyone has like, you know, beautiful, petite, very westernized features, even though they're different skin tones. Yeah, like you said, it just holds a mirror to existing systems, and change needs to happen really quick.
Just on that, have you heard about the white guy who created like an Instagram model? She was a black woman. Well, she's an AI, like she's not actually real, but he's created like a model who is a black woman who doesn't exist. And he's got like, this model has like millions of followers, and he's capitalizing. You're making money off of, like, he's a white man. Yeah. How are you capitalizing off him? Yeah.
For you, operating day to day, on the ground, in a professional working structure, what, in your opinion, does the UK need to change or act on over the next couple of years most to create more inclusive spaces?
Such a good question. And there's no like single solution or answer. What I've seen a lot recently over the past year or two is actually, it feels like a bit of a reversal with diversity and inclusion focus and initiatives within the corporate world. During my 7 years of like working within the corporate environment, it feels like when I joined the workplace, there was like an increase in this focus on diversity and inclusion and embracing it and realizing that it is something that's really important, to then reaching probably the peak, or what really magnified it was like the horrendous murder of George Floyd. And then there was a lot of like Asian hate movement that also, I think, amplified the importance of it, of companies focusing on diversity and inclusion. But really recently, I think maybe it could be tied with like the cost of living crisis. Basically, like companies being forced to like take a look at their finances and cutting out things that aren't necessary. And they're picking like diversity and inclusion as something that it's a nice to have, we don't need to do that. When actually I believe that it's just so crucial and fundamental if we want to lead to like a better world, if we want to lead to, and actually from a commercial perspective, if you have like a more diverse and inclusive workforce, it leads to better outcomes commercially as well. So I think at the moment, en masse, like largely the corporate world is quite short-sighted with like making cuts when it comes to like diversity, equity and inclusion initiatives and support and focus. So I think probably the next few years, what would help is like reigniting that focus on these initiatives and the importance of them, and actually putting money behind them. Because I think that there's also this like increased expectation that like, well, we'll do like a talk from like someone who's like diverse and we're not going to pay them because it's good exposure for you. It's like, that doesn't have any sustainability or longevity to it, and you're perpetuating the issue. So like we actually need to like put money behind initiatives to support and enhance and grow and promote people from different backgrounds.
To add to that, I always believe that we always seem to be optimizing. Optimize as in like strive to be better, you know, commercially, strive to be better like financially. Like we're like stripping away all these things to optimize like a company's performance. But yeah, what are we optimizing for when it compromises our human integrity and creativity? And that, I believe, is what it means to be a human, like our imperfection and flaws. So to wrap up, what would you say your letter to diaspora would be?
Find people who understand you, because I think sometimes it can feel isolating and lonely, especially if maybe you're typically in environments where you look around and maybe there's no one who looks like you or comes from the same or similar background to you. So I think it's so powerful to find those people who kind of get it a bit more. So yeah, I'd say like really focus on community.
Love that. So let the people know where they can find you.
Yes.
What you've got going on, where they can stream you.
Yes, so I can be found on LinkedIn, Maya Welford, or on Instagram at that'smyname_pod. If you do want to come on as a guest, I'm always looking for guests. So if you have a name-related story that you'd like to share, come and have a chat with me.
Wow.
Awesome.
You know she's a corporate baddie when she leads with LinkedIn and not Instagram.
Thank you so much, Maya. It's been an absolute pleasure. Super insightful. We'll be engaging with name thinking a lot deeper.
Sure.
And yeah, it's been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. Maraming salamat.
Catch you in the next episode.